My name is Erica, and I never thought that I would find myself embroiled in a family drama that would change my life forever. At the age of 29, I was living a very ordinary life in a noisy, crowded city that never slept, where the streets were packed with cars during the day and in the evenings illuminated by the neon signs of countless restaurants, bars, and shops. For the past 5 years, I've been working as a secretary at a large global tech corporation located in the heart of the city, surrounded by sparkling mirrored skyscrapers, business suits, and phone calls that don't stop for a minute. The job was not my dream, but it allowed me to pay the bills for my small but cozy rented apartment in an old building where the cracked stucco on the ceiling reminded of bygone times. Before we continue, I am very curious. Which country are you from, dear listeners? Write in the comments where you are listening to us from. Enjoy listening. The weekend was my only salvation. I ran off to dance classes, lost myself in the rhythm, obeying the music, and forgot about all those papers that would be waiting for me on my desk again on Monday. It wasn't much, but it was my life, and I thought there was enough in it not to complain. It was more difficult with my family. I had a younger sister, Emily, who seemed to have received all the parental love, care, and attention from birth. Her mother adored her with such endless devotion, as if Emily was something special, made of fragile porcelain that needed to be protected from any adversity. Father? He just followed his mother's wishes, agreeing with her in everything and rarely taking the initiative. Her name always sounded in our house. Emily did it. Emily did it. And despite all my attempts not to get annoyed, I couldn't help but feel like a shadow existing somewhere in the background of the family picture. Over the years, a wall has grown between us. Phone calls became less frequent, and family meetings gradually turned into something that I only found out about through photos on social media. I saw their joyful faces, solemnly set tables, candles, and gifts, but I was not there. I told myself that it didn't matter, that I had grown up a long time ago and had my own life, in which there was no place for childish insults. That's why, when my phone suddenly flashed my mother's number on Tuesday evening, I almost dropped it in surprise. I stared at the screen, vacillating between the urge to drop the call and curiosity, which, despite my best efforts, was slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. In the end, I answered. "Erica, this is your mom." The voice on the other end of the line sounded unusually dry, without the usual lengthy introductions and general phrases. "Hi, Mom." I tried to keep my tone neutral. "Your father wants to see you," she said, as if that explained everything. I frowned. "Is something wrong?" "Just come this weekend, Saturday at 2 p.m. Don't be late." And with that, she hung up the phone, leaving me with anxiety throbbing in my chest and an empty phone screen. I stared at him for a long time, struggling with conflicting feelings. What could be so important that my father, who hadn't shown much interest in me for years, now wanted to see me? Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation, tell myself that I didn't care. But the other couldn't help but feel that this was something serious. That's why, on that very Saturday, at exactly 2 p.m., I was standing in front of my parents' house, looking at the facade, which had not changed over the years. The house still looked grand and immaculate, a monument to their well-being, and at the same time, a reminder of a life I'd never fit into. I took a deep breath before raising my hand and pressing the doorbell. The long seconds of silence stretched into eternity. But then the door abruptly opened and the mother appeared on the threshold. Her face, as always, was a mask of restrained indifference. "You're here," she stated, and without waiting for my answer, she stepped aside to let me in. I entered the spacious hall where every object, from the perfectly symmetrical vases to the highly polished parquet, screamed that everything here was subject to order and tradition. They were already waiting for me in the living room. My father was sitting in a chair by the window. He looked pale, haggard, with deeply sunken eyes and haggard features. I've never seen him like this. Emily and her husband James were sitting next to each other on the couch, a perfect, flawless couple with immaculate hairstyles and intense smiles that couldn't hide their concern. The atmosphere in the room was thick with silence, from unspoken words, from something that I felt was about to explode. I came unsteadily closer, sat on the edge of the chair, still trying to figure out what was going on here. And then, for the first time in many years, my father looked directly at me, long, intently, with something that resembled a faint tinge of regret in his dull eyes. "Thank you for coming," his voice was weak, but there was something in it that I couldn't understand. "What's going on?" I asked, feeling anxiety building in my chest. My father exhaled slowly, looked at Emily, who suddenly tensed, squeezing her husband's fingers in her hands, and then looked back at me. "I have to tell you something." My heart thudded in my chest. I felt it would be something that would change everything. "I need to tell you all something." My father said these words with such heaviness, as if each of them weighed a ton, and suddenly the space between us was filled with a tangible tension that made it difficult to breathe. He continued his stride across the room, his movements still confident, but now they seemed somehow strained, as if he was trying to give himself a boost that wasn't really there. I looked at him, and some kind of oppressive premonition was growing inside me, a fear that had not yet taken shape in words, but had already crept into my soul like an icy chill. I'm terminally ill," he finally said, and his voice, which had sounded steady and firm before, trembled slightly. "The doctors say I don't have much time left." The words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking all the air out of my lungs. Something snapped inside, and I felt tears instantly fill my eyes, blurring my vision, turning the outlines of the room into blurred spots. Despite all the difficulties, the coldness, and the many years when I felt invisible next to him, I loved my father, and the thought of losing him soon was unbearable. "Dad," I gasped, not recognizing my own voice, and reaching out, squeezed his hand, which now seemed fragile and weak to me. He squeezed my fingers weakly in response. His face lit up with a sad, almost apologetic smile. At that moment, he looked tired and exhausted, as if he had already been through too much, and now the only thing left for him was to tell us the truth. Emily sobbed almost theatrically, burying her face in her husband's shoulder, while her mother sat with a stony expression on her face, her lips pressed into a thin, barely noticeable line. She didn't say a word, and I couldn't help but wonder, how long have they known this? How long have they been hiding this from me? Why am I only learning about this now? "That's not all," my father continued, and now his voice sounded more confident, louder, as if his decision had already been made, and now he was just saying it out loud. There was a tense silence in the room. Even Emily's sobs stopped, and I felt everyone freeze, waiting for her to continue. "I've made some decisions about my will," he said, looking from his mother to his sister, and then finally to me. I noticed Mom leaning forward slightly, her fingers curled into a fist, and her eyes flashed with a wary gleam. The father exhaled and continued. "Mary," he looked at his mother, "you will get an apartment in the city." She nodded curtly, expressing no emotion, as if this fact was not unexpected for her. "Emily," he looked at my sister, "the house will be yours." Emily's eyes widened, relief flashed in them, and then, through the remnants of tears, a smile appeared on her face. I knew that she had expected this, that it was something self-evident to her, like a confirmation of her special status in the family. But then my father turned to me, and there was something new in his eyes, a determination I'd never seen before. "Erica," he said, and I felt everything in the room freeze. "I've decided to leave you all my savings, all $800,000. I stopped breathing for a moment. $800,000? An amount that was more than I could ever have imagined, more than I've earned over the years working at Global Tech, more than I could have saved up in my entire life. But more important than the amount itself was that it looked like a confession, as an apology, as an attempt to give me back all the time when I was just a shadow to him. The silence that followed these words was deafening. And then all hell broke loose. Emily jumped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "Dad, it's not fair," her voice rang out, and her hands clenched into fists. "Erica is no longer a part of this family. She doesn't deserve this." "This is outrageous," Mom hissed, glaring at me with such disgust that I felt uneasy. "John, you have to cut her out of the will. You don't know what you're doing." I sat there, stunned, unable to believe that they were saying it out loud, not shy, not holding back. And then the father slammed his fist on the coffee table. The roar reverberated through the room, and everyone instantly froze. "This is my decision, and I will not change it. Stop it," he roared, and I had never heard him speak so loudly, so harshly, with such an unconditional tone that brooked no objections. He turned to his mother, his eyes flashing with anger. "I've been under your influence for too long, Mary. I neglected Erica because of you, and now it ends." The room was dead silent again. I looked at my father, and for the first time in my life, I saw him for real, without the shadow of my mother, without her words, without her power over him. He stood up for me. My father turned to me, and his anger turned to sadness. "Erica, will you ever forgive me? I've been a terrible father to you." Tears were streaming down my cheeks, and I couldn't hold back. I got up from my seat, walked over to him, and hugged him tightly, feeling how fragile he had become. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered, closing my eyes. "I love you." We held on to each other for a long time, and at that moment, all the resentment, all the pain, all the long years of misunderstanding disappeared. When we finally pulled away, my father looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, and I realized that he needed to rest. "It's time for me to lie down," he said slowly, getting up. "Erica, thank you for coming." I nodded, watching him leave the room. As soon as the door closed behind him, the atmosphere instantly changed. Mom stepped forward, her face a mask of rage that she could barely contain. "Listen, Erica," her voice was icy. "You have to do the right thing and give up your share of the inheritance." I looked into her eyes. "No." My voice sounded firm, stronger than I expected. "I won't refuse. Dad wants me to have it, and I respect his wishes." Emily's face contorted with rage. Her eyes, which usually sparkled with a smug gleam, were now shooting lightning bolts, and her thin lips were compressed into a narrow line, as if she was trying her best to keep from screaming. She took a step forward, so close that I felt the heat of her breath on my skin, and then poked me in the chest with her finger with such force that I instinctively recoiled. "You're going to regret this, Erica. Mark my words." Her voice was low, full of malice, hissing like a snake preparing to attack. I looked into her eyes and saw in them not only rage, but also intent, as if a plan for revenge had already matured in her head, and I could only wait for the blow. The next 2 weeks turned into torture. My phone wouldn't stop ringing, bursting with calls and messages that came one after the other, as if she and her mother had set themselves the goal of breaking me. At first, it was just persuasion. "Erica, you have to do the right thing. Your father was sick. He didn't understand what he was doing. It wasn't a fair decision." Then the tone became tougher, colder. "Do you want to take money from your family? How can you be so selfish? I hope you will sleep peacefully knowing that you betrayed your mother." And then the outright threats began. "We're not just going to let this go. You don't know who you've contacted yet. Erica, if you don't change your mind, you'll regret it." I ignored them, blocked numbers, didn't read messages, didn't answer calls, tried to focus on work, on dance lessons, on everything that would help me keep my sanity and at least the illusion of normalcy. But even when I was busy, even when I was surrounded by people, I felt their hatred on me, as if they were nearby, watching my every move, waiting for the moment to stab me in the back. And then, on a gray Tuesday morning, I got a call. When I saw the unfamiliar number, my stomach clenched. I knew it. My father is dead. I don't remember how I got to my parents' house. Everything seemed blurry, muffled, as if I was watching it through a cloudy glass. The funeral turned into a whirlwind of black clothes, gloomy faces, and quiet words spoken in low voices. I stood at the edge of the grave, watched the coffin descend, and felt a strange, paralyzing emptiness cover me, as if something important had gone with my father, something that I hadn't even had time to understand. Mother and Emily were acting out grief. Their tears were too loud, too perfect. Their sobs were theatrical, as if they were in the center of the stage in front of the audience. Emily squeezed her husband's hand, clung to her mother, sobbed, but I saw no pain or loss in her eyes, just the calculation. But what struck me most was her necklace and bracelet. Gold-rimmed diamonds sparkled on her neck and wrist, shimmering in the light as she held a handkerchief to her eyes, blotting her completely dry eyes. They looked obscenely expensive, luxurious, and obviously new. On the day of her father's funeral, she sported jewelry that I was sure was worth a fortune. After the ceremony, everyone gathered in the house. I watched as Emily defiantly took off her jewelry, slowly, with exaggerated care, carefully putting them in her purse, as if showing everyone how much they were dear to her. The last of the guests had left, and I gathered my things, preparing to leave. It was at this moment that all hell broke loose. "My jewels!" Suddenly, there was a hysterical scream. I turned around and saw Emily pressing her hands to her neck and wrist, her face contorted with mock horror. "They're gone!" she squealed, her eyes darting around the room. Her mother immediately jumped up to her and grabbed her by the arms. "What happened? Someone stole them!" An oppressive silence hung in the room, and I felt a cold fear freeze my spine. Mom turned to me, her eyes boring into me with a look full of accusation. "Well, well, isn't that convenient?" Her voice was as cold as a sharp knife. "The only person who has been here all day is the one who wins so much." I felt the blood drain from my face. "They're setting me up." "You can't be serious," I whispered, feeling the world around me shrink into a narrow, dark hallway. "I didn't take anything." Emily's husband took a step forward, his face full of assumed concern, but predatory anticipation was evident in his eyes. "Then you don't mind showing us what's in your bag, do you, Erica?" I tightened my grip on the bag, feeling sweat break out on my palms. I knew I was innocent. I knew there were no jewels in my bag, but I also knew that it didn't matter to them. "No," I said firmly, my back straightened, and my voice sounded unexpectedly confident. "I don't need to prove anything to you." Emily's husband took out his phone. "Then you leave me no choice." He pressed the call button. "I'm calling the police." It was at that moment that I saw a grin flash across Emily's face. She won. My heart was pounding in my chest, my ears were buzzing, and my palms turned icy cold when 2 officers entered the house. "Officers!" Emily rushed to them, her voice trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she turned into a picture of inconsolable grief. "It was such a hard day. I can't believe that someone could do this on the day of my father's funeral." The officers exchanged glances, then the senior turned to me. "Ma'am, could you open the bag?" I froze. I knew that whatever happened next wouldn't end well for me. With shaking hands, I unzipped the zipper. The officer looked inside, and his face hardened. He reached out and pulled out Emily's necklace and bracelet. I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The air in the room became viscous, dull, heavy, as if soaked in the poison of this monstrous accusation, which was thrown at me like a cleverly set trap into which I unwittingly fell. I looked at the jewels sparkling in the officer's hands, at those cold, soulless stones that had just turned my life into a nightmare, and tried to figure out how this could happen, but every thought shattered against reality. No one believed me. "It's impossible." My voice was weak, trembling, almost lost. I looked into the officer's eyes, but he remained indifferent, stern, as if he was just another suspect in front of him, and not a man who had just been betrayed by his closest people. "I didn't take them. I was framed." But my words were drowned out by the chaos that erupted in the room. Mom and Emily instantly started dancing, their voices sounding harsh, angry, and they hurled accusations at me, as if I were an insignificant criminal who had finally been exposed. "You liar!" Emily screamed, her voice breaking, her chest heaving convulsively, and tears that hadn't been there a minute ago suddenly gushed out. "I always knew you were jealous of me. Now you've shown your true colors." "The thief!" Her mother supported her. There was something much scarier than anger in her gaze. Satisfaction, as if she had finally found a way to cut me out of her life completely. The words cut me deeper than any knife. I couldn't believe this was happening, that they were really going to do this, that they were ready to ruin my life just to take the money my father had left me. I didn't have time to say anything because the officers abruptly took my hands and pulled me towards the exit. As I was being led through the threshold of my parents' house, I caught a glimpse of Emily. She was covering her mouth with her hand, pretending to sob, but behind the gesture was a smug, satisfied smile. At the police station, I sat in the cold interrogation room, wearing the black dress I'd worn to bury my father that morning, and tried to process what had just happened. The gray walls were oppressive, the lamp above my head was crackling, which made the room even darker, and my arms, crossed over my chest, were shaking, although I didn't know if it was from the cold or from horror of what would happen next. Several hours passed, and I was already preparing for another interrogation, but when the door finally opened, I froze. My mother came in. Not a cop, not a lawyer, but a mom. I blinked, not understanding what she was doing here. But when the officer standing guard nodded silently and left, leaving us alone, anxiety surged with renewed force. As soon as the door closed, her face changed. Her mournful, broken expression, with which she sobbed at the funeral, disappeared as if it had never been, replaced by something icy, hard, calculating. She was no longer playing the grieving mother. Now there was another woman standing in front of me, and I suddenly realized that I had never really known her. "Listen carefully, Erica," she hissed, leaning closer, her eyes sparkling with triumphant coldness. "You have one chance to fix this mess." I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. "Give up the inheritance, give it to Emily, and all this will disappear." I blinked, not immediately realizing the meaning of her words. "What?" "Accusations." She pursed her lips, looking at me expectantly. "You just sign the papers and they let you out. Everything is simple." I was trying to process it, trying to accept the fact that my mother had just offered me a deal, but deep down, I knew they had planned it. I eagerly searched her face, hoping to see a drop of doubt, a shadow of remorse, but there was nothing there. "You set me up," I whispered. Her mother's laugh was harsh, prickly, almost contemptuous. "Oh, please, you stopped being a part of this family a long time ago." I could feel the blood pounding in my temples, a sickening mixture of fear and disgust building in my chest. "You have a choice now, Erica." She leaned closer, her voice low and threatening. "Give me the money, or we'll make sure you go to jail." She paused, watching my reaction. "Think about it," she continued with a cold sneer. "The thief who stole from her own sister on the day of her father's funeral. No one will be on your side. Your reputation will be destroyed. You'll lose everything." I was shaking. The weight of their betrayal hit me with such force that it became difficult to breathe. "No," I said, but my voice was barely a whisper. "What?" Her eyes narrowed. I clenched my fists. "No," I repeated louder, feeling a storm of anger and despair rising inside. "I won't do that." "I didn't steal anything, and I won't let you blackmail me." Anger flashed in her mother's eyes, and her mouth twisted into a vicious grimace. "You ungrateful rat," she hissed, spitting venom. "I hope you enjoy prison." She straightened up, angrily squared her shoulders, her gaze boring into me, filled with icy triumph. "Everyone will know what you've done, by stealing from his own family." Her lips curled into a wry smile. "You'll only be a criminal, a disgrace." She turned around and abruptly slammed the door. I sat in silence, stunned. Tears were streaming down my face, and there was nothing I could do about it. I was released on bail later that night. I ran out of the police station, breathing in the cool night air, but it didn't bring relief. At that moment, I received a message. I looked at the phone, and my heart sank. "Erica, I've heard disturbing rumors. Until the situation resolves, I think it's better for you to take a vacation. Of course, I believe in your innocence, but we need to protect the company's reputation. Take care of yourself." Letting go of the phone, I leaned against the cold brick wall, feeling my world crumble. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I had long forgotten, a sense of purpose, clear and unshakable, as if something had finally clicked inside me, bringing together all the pieces of my broken life. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for them to destroy me anymore. I was no longer a victim. With trembling fingers, I searched the internet for private detectives, going through dozens of names, but one stood out from the rest. Jack Reeves, a former police detective who, after leaving the department, became a private investigator with a reputation for solving the most complex and complicated cases. His name came up in articles about corruption, revelations, high-profile lawsuits, and if anyone could help me, it was him. I took a deep breath before pressing the call button, and to my surprise, when a low, husky voice came on the other end, I spoke with much more confidence than I expected. I told him everything about my father, about the will, about the theft they set up, about how I was arrested and then blackmailed at the police station, forcing me to give up my inheritance. "Miss Thompson," he finally spoke when I finished my story. His voice was steady, but there was intense concentration in it. "This is a very delicate situation. Family conspiracies are never simple, and it can be extremely difficult to prove them. But if what you're saying is true, we'll find the evidence." I gripped the phone tighter. "How much will it cost?" Jack paused for a moment. "It's not cheap." I thought about the inheritance, about the money that was still frozen awaiting trial, and that if I didn't prove my innocence, I would not only lose it, but also the rest of my life. "Money's not a problem," I replied, trying not to think about how true that was. "I need to clear my name." The next 3 weeks flew by in a blur. I met Jack in dark alleys, in cafes with dim lights, in his small office littered with folders and photographs, while he was digging into my family's past, trying to find at least some kind of clue. I could barely sleep, waiting for news from him, keeping my phone on speaker even at night, because every time he called, my heart skipped a beat. I threw myself into dancing, exhausting myself to the limit, because only there, on the floor, with rhythmic music, could I forget about everything that was happening to me outside of it. And then there was silence, full, ringing. No calls from work, no new threats from Mother and Emily, but I knew it was the calm before the storm. The call came on a rainy Tuesday. "Erica." Jack's voice was low, strained, and I knew immediately that the news was going to be bad. "I found something, but you won't like it." My heart sank. "What is it, Jack?" He sighed heavily. "I've been following your mother and sister, trying to catch them discussing inheritance or fraud, but they're too careful. They never talk about it publicly, and I can't legally install listening devices in their house." I felt the last glimmer of hope fading, like a dim candle flame blown out by a gust of wind. "That's it?" My voice sounded tired, almost resigned. "Is there nothing we can do?" There was a hint of hesitation in Jack's voice. "I did find something, but that's not your case. It's about your sister." I straightened up. "What's wrong with her?" Jack hesitated, but then, as if making a decision, he said, "She's having an affair, Erica. I filmed her entering the hotel with a young man who is definitely not her husband. And it wasn't a one-time meeting. I have recordings of their conversations. This is, to put it mildly, not very flattering for her husband." I sat in silence, feeling my mind racing in search of a way out. "Send me everything you have," I finally said, quietly but decisively. "Are you sure?" "Every photo, every record, everything." I heard a short grunt of approval from the other end of the line. "Good." As soon as I hung up, I took action. For the next hour, I went through the photos and audio recordings, as if flipping through the pages of a dirty, vulgar novel in which my sister was the main character. In each photo, she looked happy, much happier than she had ever been in her marriage. Her face glowed when she looked at her lover, when she touched his hand, when she opened the door of a hotel room with exquisite interiors, as if she were not hiding, not afraid of exposure. I listened to the recordings. My husband is an idiot. He doesn't understand anything. I use it, so what? He's just a handy wallet. I closed my eyes and felt something break inside me. Emily always got everything she wanted. She always bent everyone under her. She always got away with it. But not this time. I chose a photo, the one where she enters the hotel, touching her lover's hand, with a satisfied smile on her lips. I opened my phone and sent it to James, her husband, by attaching one simple message. I wonder what will happen next. And then, I'll meet you tomorrow at Luna Cafe at 1400. The next day, I came to the cafe early, too early, and now I was sitting by the window, watching the raindrops trickle down the glass, leaving winding paths like thin cracks, similar to those that had already formed in my life. My nerves were on edge, every second of waiting stretched out, turning into excruciating tension. But I couldn't afford to tremble, doubt, or retreat. At exactly 2 p.m., the door opened with a thud, and James stepped inside. His steps were fast and confident, but I could see his fingers clenching into fists and his jaw twitching with tension. His face was a mask of pent-up rage and curiosity. Emotions were beating inside him like a storm, and I knew he hadn't come for idle talk. "What's wrong with Erica?" "What is it?" he asked, sitting down across from me, his voice muffled, strained, and an indomitable fire of suspicion flashed in his eyes. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts, pushing away the fear, because this conversation could change everything. "I think you already know, James." I met his gaze without turning away for a second. "But what you saw is just the tip of the iceberg." In the next hour, I laid out the whole truth in front of him. I showed him the photos of Emily entering the hotel with her lover, looking happy and free, and then the ones where they went out together hours later, touching each other in a way she had never touched her husband. I played recordings of Emily laughing, ridiculing his behavior, his trust, his blind faith in her. "He's a complete fool. He doesn't even know. Soon I'll get everything I need and leave him with a nose." I'm already tired of his miserable existence. Each new word changed James, his hands clenched into fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his lips pressed into a thin line, his breathing became heavy. He sat in silence, and I could see his face getting paler and paler. When the recordings ended, he looked up at me with burning, pain-filled eyes. "What do you want?" His voice was hoarse, as if pulled from the depths of his soul. I leaned forward, and he didn't look away. "Justice, James, and I think you are too. Help me prove that I was framed, and we'll both get what we deserve." A few days have passed. I didn't know if James would do it, but then my phone vibrated. Message. From him. I unlocked the screen, and my heart started beating loudly when I saw that he had sent some audio files. I pressed the first one with trembling fingers. Emily's voice filled the silence of the room. "Can you believe how easy it was to put that necklace in Erica's purse?" I felt my breath catch in my throat, but the file wasn't finished yet. My mother's laughter sounded next, cold, calculating, completely unlike the voice of the woman who once called herself my mother. "I know. Did you see her face when the police found him? It was priceless." I closed my eyes as the next file played in my headphones. "Well, she'll have no choice but to hand over the money. She's nobody now." I listened to record after record, plunging into heartless intrigues, into poisonous conversations, into cruel laughter, and each word was like a knife plunging deeper. But now I had proof. The day of the reading of the will came sooner than I expected. I walked to the notary's office, feeling my stomach cramp, but I kept my head up. When I came in, Mom and Emily were already there. Their faces were smug. Their gazes swept over me with disdain and superiority. I saw James sitting in the corner, his face set in stone. But when our eyes met, he nodded almost imperceptibly. The notary, a thin man with metal-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat, unfolded the document in front of him, and began to read the will. He read out the asset allocation, confirming the very decision his father had announced that day in the house. When he finished, I stood up. "If you can," I said, and my own words surprised me with their firmness. Mom narrowed her eyes, her lips curled into a satisfied smile, and she nodded approvingly. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses, Erica," she said in a soft, almost affectionate voice. "I knew you'd make the right choice." Emily was beaming, her eyes sparkling with anticipation, and she and her mother exchanged triumphant glances. But I was going to disappoint them. I slowly took out my phone. "I'm afraid you misunderstood," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of the situation. I clicked play. The room was filled with their voices. Can you believe how easy it was to put that piece of jewelry in Erica's purse? I know. Did you see her face when the police found him? It was priceless. Well, she'll have no choice but to hand over the money. She's nobody now. I watched them, how the color drained from their faces. As Emily gasped, her hand trembled. How Mom remained motionless, but her lips pressed into a thin line, and panic flashed in her eyes. When the recording ended, the chaos exploded. "You're lying," Emily screamed, rushing towards me. But James stepped between us, his face unreadable. "How dare you?" Mom hissed. And for the first time in my life, I saw her composure crumble. I looked at them and knew that this day would change everything. James suddenly spoke, his voice cutting through the growing chaos, sounding harsh even, but there was barely contained anger in it, as if he was teetering on the edge of self-control, ready to explode at any second. "Everyone shut up!" The room, which a moment ago resembled a battlefield, was suddenly plunged into intense silence. Emily, who had been yelling at her husband a moment ago, froze, her chest heaving, her fingers clenching into fists, but her voice was stuck in her throat. My mother, who had previously hurled venomous insults at me, also quieted down, giving me a look full of hatred and contempt. I stood in the middle of this shattered drama, looking at them, and suddenly realized I no longer feel fear. A heavy pause hung in the air before the notary broke it, his voice harsh and authoritative, cutting through the tense silence. "This is a trial, not a circus. Everyone calm down, otherwise I'll order you out." The notary's words echoed in the room, causing everyone to freeze. No one dared to break the silence. No one dared to even move. And at that moment, James abruptly stood up. His face was a mask of rage, his hands were clenched into fists, and his voice was trembling with anger. "Since we decided to wash dirty laundry in public, then I also have something to add." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small envelope, pulled out a photograph, and threw it with all his might on the table in front of Emily. She froze and then slowly lowered her gaze. In the photo, she was standing at the entrance to the hotel with a young man next to her, his hand on her waist, their faces glowing with happiness and passion, and there was no doubt about their connection. "I know everything, Emily." James spoke coldly, without emotion, but his every sentence sounded like a sentence. "I know about your affair, about your lies, about how you used me for money." Emily recoiled, her lips twitching, but the words didn't come out of her mouth. "Did you think you could take everything for yourself?" he continued, his voice resonating with anger but remaining icy. "You made a mistake. I'm filing for divorce, and thanks to our marriage, you won't see a dime." He waited a moment before adding the last punch. "You'll also pay me compensation for your infidelity." Emily's face paled. She opened her mouth like a fish stranded on a beach, but no sound came out. I looked at my mom, who seemed speechless for the first time in her life. Her face expressed a mixture of shock, horror, and the realization that their carefully constructed world was crumbling right before her eyes. And then the notary's office doors flew open. 2 policemen entered. Their faces were stern, impassive, and their eyes showed determination to do their job. "Mary Thompson?" "Emily Thompson?" "What is it?" one of them asked, but there was no doubt in his voice who was standing in front of him. Mom and Emily looked up, and tears instantly poured down their cheeks. "You are under arrest for false charges of theft and attempted blackmail," the officer continued, pulling out handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." When the steel bracelets clicked shut on their wrists, I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. It was justice, but it was also the final nail in the lid of our family coffin. I followed the police out of the office, watching them being put into different patrol cars. Mom didn't say a word. Her face was as gray as stone, and her eyes were empty and cold. Emily was hysterical, screaming, yelling something unintelligible, until the officer closed the door behind her. Sirens wailed, and patrol cars pulled away, taking them away. And when their red and blue lights disappeared in the distance, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It's all over. I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and dialed a familiar number. Erica? My boss sounded worried. Is everything okay? I smiled, for the first time in a long time. Better than fine, I replied. My voice rang with confidence, freedom, and a new beginning. Now I can explain everything. The accusations against me were false, and I have proof. I told him in brief but clear detail what had happened. When I finished, there was a soft whistle on the phone. Erica, I'm so sorry that you had to go through all this, he said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. But I'm glad the truth came out. He hesitated before adding, Look, your job is still here. When you're ready to come back, just tell me. In fact, I'd love to see you in the office as soon as you feel able to work. I closed my eyes and felt calm for the first time in a long time. My life was no longer theirs. She was all mine now. The weeks after the confrontation at the notary's office were filled with a whirlwind of litigation, endless meetings with lawyers, and decisions that changed not only my life forever, but also the fate of those who so desperately tried to destroy me. When the truth came out, the charges against me were quickly dropped, and I felt an indescribable sense of relief, as if the heavy, cold weight I had been carrying for the past few months had suddenly slipped off my shoulders, allowing me to take a deep breath for the first time in a long time. But if it was the end of a nightmare for me, it was just beginning for Mom and Emily. They were charged with false denunciation and attempted blackmail, and the trial that followed was swift, relentless, and ruthless, because the recorded evidence was incontrovertible, leaving no chance of acquittal. I watched the process with a strange mixture of detachment and satisfaction, as if it were not my own triumph, but a production where justice finally took a central role. The judge, a woman with a stern face, wild eyes, and an authoritative voice, studied the case materials and announced the verdict. In addition to the imposed punishment, the court decides that Mary and Emily Thompson are obliged to pay Erica Thompson substantial compensation for the damage to her reputation and emotional suffering. When the amount was announced, I saw my mother turn pale. Her fingers gripping the armrests turned white with tension, and her eyes darted around as if she was trying to find a way out that did not exist. Emily burst into tears, sobbing so loudly that the judge shot her a disapproving look, as if making it clear that pity was the last thing they deserved. In the following days, I watched from afar as the world they had built on deception and manipulation for so long crumbled to dust. Mom had to sell the apartment her father had left her, a beautiful place in the city center, expensive repairs, exquisite furniture, everything that for years had been her pride and the illusion of a perfect life was now gone from her hands, because all the proceeds were used to cover her part of the fine. But Emily got the worst of it. The house that she inherited on the day when, beaming with triumph, she looked at me eye to eye with undisguised contempt, now had to be sold to cover her share of the court decision. But her downfall didn't end there. James, true to his word, filed for divorce, and their prenup turned out to be a death sentence for her. He demanded compensation, which was stipulated in the contract in case of treason, and the pitiful money that remained after the sale of the house went to him. In a few short months, Mom and Emily had lost everything: their homes, their social status, your financial security. Now they have nothing left but the consequences of their own actions. As for me, I found myself in a position I never even dared to dream of. After all these trials, I had more money than I could have imagined. Money from my father, compensation from my mother and sister. All this was an amount that could completely change my life. But I didn't want to just burn them through or spend them on instant gratification. I thought for a long time, weighed my options, consulted with financial advisors, read articles, studied investments and the real estate market. In the end, I made a decision that brought me peace of mind and confidence in the future. I bought an apartment. Beautiful, spacious, flooded with light, with panoramic windows overlooking the city landscape, but located in a quiet, peaceful area where you could wake up to the sound of birds singing and not to the hum of cars. This house has become something I've never had before, a place that belongs only to me. I invested the rest of the money, carefully, balanced, with the expectation of stability and long-term benefits. I didn't just want to live for today, but to create a foundation for myself that would make me truly independent. Standing at the window in my new apartment, looking out at the twinkling lights of the city that used to seem like a cage to me, but now has become my home, I couldn't help but think about everything I had to go through. Pain, betrayal, loneliness, the struggle for justice. But it all led to this moment. I thought about Mom and Emily, who were now struggling to make ends meet, and how they used to think they were untouchable, and now they were at the bottom, and part of me felt sorry for them. But a much larger part knew. These were the consequences of their own decisions. They tried to take everything from me, but in the end, they lost it themselves. My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. A message from my boss. "I confirm your return to work next week. I'll be glad to see you in the office again. Welcome back." I smiled, feeling real, genuine delight for the first time in a long time. I was coming back to life, but not to the one that was before, to the new one. The real one.